lot of work with our local koala population. Rob's been out at all hours of the night and day when the call comes in that there's a koala to be found, and the koalas need to be tagged, marked, so that we know, well, we're learning all about the koala population, how big it is, where it's going, and Rob is leading the charge there. And we very much appreciate the fact that Rob has come tonight to give us his time. And I thank you very much, Rob, and please.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Thanks, Beth. And before I go, I should thank all the people that have helped me with the koala work too over the years, particularly Lynn Bowden, Mick and Wendy Fairs, and a host of other people who have thrown in their time at all odd moments to help out. But tonight, I'm not going to talk about koalas, or very fleeting mention of koalas. After all, it must be 16 years since I've started to work on the koalas, and I've spoken about them so often that it's actually quite nice to talk about something else. And but I hope it won't be too difficult. I should also warn you too that I might be okay at punching little droplets out of koala ears, but I'm not too good with computers, so I'm sure to make a mess of that when we get round to it. So bear with me when that comes up. You heard from Alan Leishman on the first of these set of 4 lectures, and it's interesting that in 1987, when I first came out to Campbelltown, I met Alan, and Alan was impressed with the Mount Annan Gardens, as I was, as being a natural experiment for seeing what arrives from the local district over time as you revegetate an area. So while Alan was getting base data for birds at Mount Annan, I was interested in getting base data for the number of mammals in the gardens. And as part of that process, I read up on all the literature that I could find about mammals in the district. It wasn't a big job. There was very little published. But what was published that I was interested in was an environmental impact statement for a sand mine that was down by Spring Creek, which is just on the northern side of the Nepean by Macarthur Bridge. And as part of this environmental impact statement, there was a fauna survey that was done by a zoologist from the University of Sydney. And the species list that he thought was there on this quite small spot was quite amazing. I'll rattle them off if I can remember. First of all, he thought there was sugar gliders, or he saw sugar gliders, brush-tailed possums, ring-tailed possums, the bush rat Rattus fuscipes, the water rat Hydromes chrysogaster, swamp wallabies, and echidna and platypus. What else was there? Anyway, that's enough. For a lad like me that comes from the mammal sterile plains of Adelaide, where you might get 2 mammals, native mammals, if you drove the length and breadth of it, this was like paradise. And I guess since then I've been really interested in the mammals that we find in the Macarthur area, and have been following that line. Now I'll try and get this. Oh dear. Yeah, here we go. Right. So after that first discovery of that EIS, this was really my aims at that time. In 1887, I'd hardly heard about koalas. It actually took an essay from one of my students for me to get interested in koalas. So these are my aims at that time, and these also are the aims of this talk tonight. And so what I'm going to be looking at is what we actually know about mammals, or what we know is actually here in the Macarthur region. That is, what species have been found recently within the last few years, what have been here historically, and what may be here but we don't know about. And it's these particular ones that I'm really interested in. And I'm hoping tonight we might be able to generate a bit of interest, well, not so much interest, but just awareness that these animals may be out there, and that if we can find them, that would be absolutely fantastic. Part of my work, or part of the aims from that previous lot of statements were covered by what was called the Urban Bushland Biodiversity Survey, which was set up by National Parks and Wildlife Service and published in 1997. They did a whole lot of surveying all across Western Sydney, and this was the results for Western Sydney. That is, there were 62 indigenous species that had been found at some stage or other, and as you can see, 25 of those species vulnerable, 16 threatened, 15 considered stable. Now, I'm sure Don Neely out there has been adding things up and saying, where's the other 6? And the other 6, in fact, are extinct or believed to be extinct in the mainland. A lot of those include bats. There are 25 bat species. Now, I don't know anything about bats, so I'm going to steer well clear of them. But let's hope that in the 2007 series of Heritage Lectures that we can get a bat person to talk to us, because there are some fascinating bats. And I was just reading a report of mammals in Mount Annan Garden that have just been done recently, and the surveyor found a lot of marvellous bats living in the gardens, which is really exciting. Okay, the old lecturer in me can't resist a bit of a lecture material here, so I'm going to give you a bit of hard science here, and that there are 3 groups of mammals. We've got the monotremes, of which there are only 2 Australian species left. That's, of course, the echidna and the platypus. The 3rd species is the long-necked echidna from New Guinea, that's in the monotremes. Then the metatherians or marsupials, of which we've got about 140 Australian species. I guess there's probably another 30 or so South American ones. And then there's the eutherians or the placental mammals, of which there are hundreds of species. Now, as I consider these species that we've got, that is what's been recorded, what we know is here and what may be here, I'm going to proceed through this series. That is, I'm always going to talk about the monotremes, the prototherians first, and then the marsupials, and then the eutherians. So rat lovers amongst you, please don't feel offended. Okay, this drawing, I should say, was done by a great friend of mine who's now dead, called Dr. Gordon Lyon, and I put a lot of his pictures in this series because they're just so beautiful, and very few people have seen them. And it was published in a book called Monotremes and Marsupials of Australia, and they're really delightful, particularly the ones you'll see later, the bandicoots. Now, Gordon absolutely loved bandicoots, and you can see this in his drawings, but he did. But I've put that up, relative value of mammals, because I think it's worthwhile just concentrating your attention on the fact that on these prototherians, the monotremes. When you consider that of a line of mammals, an entire line of mammals that split off the main mammal group probably 80 to 100 million years ago, there's only 2 Australian species left to represent that entire line of animals, and we have those 2 living in the Macarthur region. To me, I find that just absolutely fantastic. And yet we take them for granted. Not so much perhaps the platypus, but we certainly take the echidna for granted. And when you think about it, because it represents this single line of animals, and it's such a weird and wonderful animal, and yet it wanders through our backyards occasionally, and we just tend not to notice. But it is important, and we should be looking after it. Just as we're belatedly beginning to look after the platypus and realise that mining under the rivers is not perhaps such a good thing. When you've got animals so valuable as this, we shouldn't be exposing them to any danger at all if we can avoid it. I was just thinking earlier today when I was thinking about this talk, I just wondered how many people have actually seen an echidna in the last couple of years in the Macarthur region. Show of hands. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? There's quite a nice little 3rd-year project actually in recording all those sightings and seeing if we can map where they were seen and when they were seen. So it just shows you how lucky we are to have this thing around. And I'd like to also consider the value of these animals in the rest of the talk. Okay, coming back to the Mount Annan native gardens, my first trapping revealed only the domestic mouse and Rattus rattus, the ship's rat or the tree rat, and spotlighting revealed cats, foxes and hares. But in the second year of our trip, as I was hauled my students out of their sleeping bags at an ungodly hour to help or to see Alan Leishman doing his bird bounding, we found these prints in the mud near where Alan had his net set up. Now that's a 20-cent piece, and the print part you see is actually the toe, the actual toes of the foot of the animal. The heel, which is not shown in the mud, is actually a lot longer than that. So this makes them out, or this depicts them as being a kangaroo. Now the arbitrary rule of what the difference between a wallaby and a kangaroo is about a 25 centimetre foot. So this is well over 25 centimetres, so it's a big animal. At that stage we didn't know what it was. The gardeners told us there were small black wallabies that they would occasionally see, which is the swamp wallaby. But we hadn't seen anything real big. A year or two after that I found a roadkill wallaroo about a kilometre north of the Narellan freeway intersection. And that was the first sign I'd seen of these things. A few years later, a couple started to appear in view, and last count there was 40 of these animals, which is, of course, is the wallaroo. You can imagine a population doubling probably every 5 years. If there's 40 now, there's going to be 80 in 4 years and 160 in 8 years. So these animals are dispersing in eventually, and we hope we'll see the same with wombats, bandicoots, ringtail and brushtail opossums, sugar glider, that was the one I missed. Sugar gliders down at the Spring Creek as well. So with a bit of luck, our experiment will continue, probably long after Alan and I have fallen off the perch, but we are lucky to have the gardens and so close to the Nepean River too. So we'll come back to wallaroos in just a minute. Another lecture here, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. When we look at our marsupials, there are three major lines of marsupial. There are two characters that distinguish them first, and that is the teeth structure. Now we've got two lines of teeth structure, one called the diprotodont, which is the one you're familiar with. I'll pull Nathan out to put him to work here. The diprotodont skull has got a lower jaw with two large incisors. I've got a diagram there as well, but I rather like using Nathan. So that's the diprotodont skull, and all the kangaroos, possums, gliders, what else are we missing? Koala, wombat, they are all the diprotodont line, so they are fairly closely related. Then there's another character called syndactyly. Now, if you were syndactylous, your first and second fingers would be joined together, and the two claws would be very close together, so you could trim your beard and comb it very nicely. So all the diprotodonts have got syndactylous second and third toes, and I'll give you a diagram of that in just a minute. The opposite to diprotodont is polyprotodont, which means you've got a stack of little teeth along that lower jaw, and they are typical of the carnivores. And there's a mid-group that have both got polyprotodont teeth and they've got the syndactylous toe, and that's the bandicoots, which I've got a particular fondness for. So there are three lines: the diprotodont and syndactylous toe group, the polyprotodont and syndactylous toe, which is the bandicoots, and then all the carnivorous marsupials with the polyprotodont and didactylous, that is the non-syndactylous toe. Now you have to remember this because it's important. Okay, here's your diprotodont skull, and I'm saying it's important because I want people, when we get down to the point of what we're going to do about these animals, it means that people who are walking through the bush have got to be able to recognise what's an important skull and what's not an important skull, or what's an important roadkill and what's not an important roadkill. And so these are the characters which are important. So here's our polyprotodont skull with the large lower incisor, the gap before you get the molar teeth. Pardon me. Okay, so you can, if you take any of the skulls, the gliders, the possums, the wombat, the kangaroo, and line them up together, you can see that all the bones in the skull are just squashed out versions or contracted versions of another skull of in the same group. So, and here's our marvellous syndactylus toe. You can see the second and third toes have fused, not fused together, they've run beside each other and they're in the same sort of little sleeve, if you like. And if you think back to that footprint of the wallaroo in the mud, we only saw up to the ends of the fourth joint of the toe pretty well. So the rest of that heel was sticking up. Okay, that's our syndactylus toe. And we'll come back to the wallaroos now. This is what is living in the Mount Allen Gardens. The big buck on the left, I should say, and the very pretty doe on the right. These are often confused with grey kangaroos, and some of my colleagues that should know better still do this. When you compare a grey kangaroo, for example, with a female wallaroo, the female wallaroo is a lot hairier and a lot more white in the chest and the face than the grey kangaroo. But these now seem to be doing extremely well in the Macarthur region. That urban bushland biodiversity study I mentioned before didn't list wallaroos as being in the, they didn't find them at that time. And yet we're seeing roadkills now. Where have I seen them? Raby Road. Razorback, of course, is a killing field for wallaroos at the moment. I've seen one just outside Appin. Where else? Oh, there's numerous. Anyway, wallaroos are doing extremely well for some reason. I don't know what it is. And the gardens are going to have a problem, I think. You can imagine one of those hopping on the freeway. 50 kilograms of solid muscle. It could well be a problem for them. Okay, the other species that we would expect to find in the Macarthur region is the red-necked wallaby. Now, I haven't seen any in the Macarthur region, but I've seen stacks of them in the Warragamba, behind the Warragamba area. They're very, very common there, and they should be in the Macarthur region. So I'd like people to keep their eyes out for them. They stand about yay high. So they're a relatively big wallaby, but very pretty. And I'm hoping to get reports on them. Now we get into our glider possum group, and I'm not going to show pictures of the brush-tailed possum, the ring-tailed possum, which you should all know, but they are relatively common in the Macarthur region. Although interestingly, the brush-tailed possum is declining in numbers in most of its range, except directly in peri-urban areas. This little fella is the sugar glider. You'll notice his syndactylus toe on the back foot there, and very beautiful little creature. They are relatively common along the edges of the Georges River. And here you see them side by side with the squirrel glider on the right. So the sugar glider on the left, the squirrel glider on the right. Both of these occur in the Macarthur region, and although they are difficult to tell apart, but a good friend of mine, Ray Williams, who knows these things, doing some work at Helens Park, saw them both side by side. So he was able to say definitely we have the squirrel and the sugar glider. But very beautiful little creatures, and again, we should feel privileged to have them along the Georges. Now this is a little known Australian marsupial, but very beautiful. This one's a bit moth-eaten. They actually get a lot prettier than this one. They come in two colour forms, white and grey and black. That's three forms. But they're as big as a cat. The tail is very long, and they are the only other animal besides the koala that lives entirely on eucalyptus leaves. And I've only seen one of them in the Macarthur region, and that was at the edge of the firing range at Wedderburn, on the edge of O'Hare's Creek. But presumably there are more of them about, and I would like to get feedback from people who've seen them. Now this beautiful little thing, the pygmy possum, you can fit it in the palm of your hand. And we've found these on the edge of Ayers Creek and in the swamps, near the hanging swamps off the Appinbullar Road. They're probably more common than we know, but they're very hard to trap and they're very hard to see. But again, very beautiful little animal. Here's our polyprotodon teeth, just so that you can recognise this when you examine your skulls in the field. You can see it's got incisors there on the lower jaw and a succession of cutting teeth, which are typical of the carnivores. This actually comes from a bandicoot, which I'm just leading up to. There's the foot of the bandicoot, again with its little syndactylous toe. The front foot on the underside there is a digging foot, because the bandicoots, of course, are great diggers. And here is the long-nosed bandicoot, Parameles nasuta. I've only seen one of these in the Macarthur region, and that fell into a swimming pool on Aberfoyle Road at Wedderburn. I've seen diggings, but have been unable to trap any. However, they seem to be making a bit of a comeback in Sydney at the moment. So if that's the case, we may find them about the place. They are really beautiful animals. They get very bad press because they take ticks, they carry ticks and the like. But I would dearly love to have a pair in my garden. And the more you know about them, the more you like them. And you'll see from these next couple of drawings from my friend Gordon Lyon that how much he enjoyed them. Okay, that's again the long-nosed bandicoot. And this one is a drawing that he made of a youngster climbing into the pouch. Now, I've seen that size all pile in, and it's quite a sight to see them all piling in and clearing off with mum. So yeah, let's hope that there's more of those about. This is the most common marsupial in the Macarthur region, the brown antechinus. I've chopped his tail off there, unfortunately, but I did want you to see those polyprotodon teeth there in the skull. They fit in the palm of your hand. Their sexual behaviour is, how would we say, exciting and bizarre. Time permits me to go into the details of it, but in just about every wet gully in the Macarthur region, heavily vegetated, you'll find these little things. They live under cracks in rocks, dead timber, and they live on, they're insectivorous, so they'll take, I guess, small birds, but that's straight out of the egg. Marvellous little animal. It was a great joy to us a few weeks ago to actually see a group of these antechinus playing in a dead tree, or under the bark of a dead tree. There were about 8 of them, and it was just marvellous seeing them jumping about. Very active and great characters. Now this is the one also that has been reported recently that was found in the Holsworthy audit, and this is the spotted-tailed quoll, often called the tiger cat or the tiger quoll. This is a big animal. They're over a metre long from the tip of the tail to the tip of the toe, and they can weigh up to about, oh heavens, what was it? 5 kilograms, something like that. And they're 5 kilograms of muscle and fierceness. They're apparently quite hard to locate, so there may be more of them around than we're aware of. So if anybody's losing their chickens and they're sure it's not a fox, please let me know. We would love to be able to plot the distribution of the tiger cat. Now we're getting into our eutherian mammals. This is the bush rat, Rattus fuscipes. The photograph's a bit what's the word? A bit deceiving because it makes the tail look very long. And in fact, the way you can tell a bush rat, Rattus fuscipes, from the introduced rat, Rattus rattus, is because the Rattus rattus has got a much longer tail. It's almost 1.5 times body length. Whereas for this fella, it's only about the same length as the body. But you wouldn't pick that from the photograph. And you'll find Brattus fuscipes almost everywhere. You'll find antechinus. So when I've been trapping, you'll find almost alternate traps would have either an antechinus or a Brattus fuscipes. Quite a pretty little rat. And this is another local rat, Brattus luteolus, the swamp rat. I've only found them twice, one in the front garden at Appin and the other at the gate at Victoria Road. There's a little, you can see the runways in the grass there. Quite an attractive little rat. And one single female keeps quite a large territory. In this Appin front garden, she absolutely ripped apart. Everything was tunnelled, all the roses were falling in. And the householder believed that they were being taken over by great swarms of rats, but in fact it was just one female doing the digging. And lastly, the marvellous little New Holland mouse. Now you'll only find these in the Macarthur region, probably near the hanging swamps on the edge. Very beautiful little thing. Takes an expert to distinguish between it and the domestic mouse. But it has been found very scarce, but still it is about, which is great, and seems to be linked with the deep sand or sandy areas and the edge of the swamps. Now, coming back to what might be out there, the great work is this rather, insignificant looking little frontispiece. And this work by Norm Robinson is quite amazing. He recorded, spoke to everybody connected with the Sydney Water, who'd ever walked in that area, and he amassed a great collection of sightings of the strange animals through the area. It's a marvellous piece of work and a great record. So let's have a look at some of the things that he saw or he recorded that we haven't seen for quite a while, but we're hoping still are out there. First of all, my old mate, the brush-tailed rock wallaby. Have a good look at this, because I believe that it'll still be living on the Nepean River there somewhere, and possibly up in the back of the O'Hares and in the Cataract area. Notice the brush tail for starters. It's quite a big, bushy tail. You may be able to see this little toe. The toe doesn't project beyond the edge of the foot very much, because if it sticks out too much, of course, you'll get it caught as he jumps around the rocks. So all the other wallabies will have quite long, sharp, pointy toes, but the rock wallaby's very tiny little toe. And quite nice face marking, ears quite small, and of course you'll always see them perched somewhere near rocks. And if you find a pile of rocks that you have difficulty climbing up onto, and there's a pile of pellets on the top, then highly likely it's our mate, the brush-tailed rock wallaby. Unfortunately, unless you're used to them, you can mix them up with the swamp wallaby, which I neglected to say earlier was also a very common macropod around the Macarthur region. You can see that the swamp wallaby on the right has got a long black tail. Some of them have got a white tip, not all of them. And they've got a face which superficially looks a bit like a rock wallaby. And I mean, sometimes I've been tricked sometimes too from a distance. You think that's a rock wallaby, but it's not, it's a swamp wallaby. So you've really got to be sure that you're seeing an animal sitting on a rock ledge like that to be sure you're not making a mistake. The other things to look for, however, is that the swamp wallabies, the ears are very large. The nose, the pad on the nose is quite broad. And it tends to be sort of khaki coloured rather than the chocolatey brown in the back of the brush-tailed rock wallaby. But as I said, I ideally love to find the brush-tailed rock wallaby still living out there. And because they can live in such tiny little gullies and rocky places, it's very hard to survey for them. And occasionally I get calls from people saying they think they've seen a rock wallaby, but fingers crossed it will come true. Now, Robinson found several reports of this little fellow, which is called a potteroo, quite small, only this big. And you find this in very heavily vegetated areas. Pardon me. And I've had a number of people talk to me to say that they've seen a very small wallaby out in the Hares region, and it could well be this if there's a densely vegetated enough area. We haven't seen it for some time, but with a bit of luck. And the other possibility for the small wallaby is this little one here, which is the red-necked paddymellon, not to be confused with the red-necked wallaby. This one, about 4 kilograms, whereas the red-necked would have been probably 8 to 10. Again, you'll find him in very densely vegetated areas, and you only just see a flash as he sees you and takes off. So again, we want to solve this problem of the small wallaby that's out there. Maybe 2 small wallabies, let's hope. And this little fella here has been reported in the catchments. The feather-tailed glider, again, it's fit in the palm of your hand, and you see them gliding down. They look like a leaf falling. Really beautiful little creature. And if we find this one, I'd give him a left leg for it, I think. It's the short-nosed bandicoot. Robinson thinks it may still be, or when he wrote his booklet up in 1985, he thought there's a possibility it still might be out there in the catchment. It's found today in a small little population on the northern side of the harbour. And then there's a huge gap, and you don't find it till the south coast of New South Wales. But the sort of place you would find it would be on the fringes of the upland swamps, in more sandy areas. But again, it would be great to find him. And then there's the common dunnart, Smithopsis murina, which Robinson reports. It's a bit about the size of an antechinus, about that big, but more, whereas the antechinus is flattened, this one sort of is perhaps more interesting to look at. Very difficult to trap. And the outside runner for possibilities is the eastern quoll. Now this fellow disappeared, he's probably extinct in New South Wales, pardon me. Last seen in Vaucluse in the 60s was the last record for this fellow. But when you think how much bushland we've got connected to us here at Wedderburn, just think about it. Holsworthy, Heathcote National Park, Royal National Park, all the catchment areas of Avon, Cataract, Cordeaux, and then that connects to Moreton National Park. We're so lucky that we've got this huge body of bushland, and almost entirely difficult to completely survey. So hope against hope, we've got a population of eastern quolls somewhere out there that will re-emerge at some stage. And lastly, we've got our Hydromes chrysogasta, the water rat, that the environmental impact statement from Spring Creek was so sure was living there. When you actually read it closely, he didn't actually see any, but he saw scads and scats of tracks. Now you should, a competent zoologist should be able to recognise the traps because these guys have got webbed feet. And the back foot is quite big and spread out and fleshy. And you shouldn't make a mistake. And he recorded tracks all along the area of the river. I came back a few years later and tried to trap a bit down river from him, but I couldn't get anything. But he should be there. They should be all along our rivers. There is a record of them in the early days at Campbelltown living in the tanning ponds, which were apparently up on the eastern side of Campbelltown. They were there. There's a colony still living at 5 Dock on the Sydney Harbour. They're on the Wallandilly. They should be in the Macarthur region, and they are a beautiful animal. It's and almost completely unstudied. You wouldn't think an animal that weighs well over 1 kilogram compared to, say, your Rattus 200 grams. This is a big rat, and it's got most amazing characteristics too. It can fold its ears in when it dives, so it blocks off the ear holes. It does its hunting completely with its whiskers, When it's diving, it's got a marvellous set of double furs to give it protection from the cold. And of course, it's got that big white tip on its tail as well. And yet almost nothing is known about its ecology or its biology. We don't even know where it lives around Sydney Harbour. So again, that's one that I'd love to find and should be here, and we should be able to find it. Okay, so this comes out of Norm Robinson's book, and it does show you the area that he was searching and what a huge area it is. And it's been pretty well restricted from human contact. So if we are going to find these lovely organisms, this is the place to do it. Now, what are we going to do about it? This is getting to the hard bit. Well, for a start, roadkills are the best way to go about locating organisms around the district. Hate to say it, but I rather like seeing roadkills because it means that there's a lot of animals out there to actually generate it. I know that sounds mean and horrible, but a lot of information comes from roadkills. And what it needs to do is for people to stop, look, identify it to see whether it's something unusual, photograph it, and then report it. Now, who do you report it to? Well, this is tricky because, of course, you've got to have a permit to pick up native organisms. And I may well be flaunting the law a bit because I have here a Pacific bazza that a person from the community gave me. It'd been in their freezer for quite some time, and it stayed in my freezer for quite some time, and now it's going to Alan, who's going to take it into the museum. So this is the way these things go. I don't know whether Helen would like to say a word about how legal this is. It is tricky because the museum will only record a locality if they've got a skull to work with. And that means, of course, that legally, if you don't have a license to pick things up, that it's dreadful to leave a skull that you know is valuable out there when it means a new record for an area. So I've got a license to pick up mammal skulls. I'm not sure about Pacific bazzas. But anyway, that is a problem. So one way around that, of course, is to photograph. And now people have got the digital cameras a lot. It makes it a lot easier to fire off an email with a photograph. So what you've got to get is a good shot of the teeth. If it's a roadkill, you need a good shot of the feet, the tail, and the head to make sure you've got the right characteristics. And the other thing we can do too is to make sure that in any new development that roadways have got decent passageways for animals to go under. When we showed that picture of the catchment, there are 3 major roads that go across it, and the road kills from them would be quite large. Modern road building now is tending to focus on culverts and places where gullies go under roads to allow animals to go through. And we should perhaps be looking at culverts that are already in existence to make sure animals have got free access. For example, there's a culvert between Mount Annan and University of Western Sydney that is quite large enough to allow wallaroos to go through, but there's fences on either side that would stop that from occurring. So what other things can we do? I guess just keep our eyes out for those any animal that looks different, see if you can get a photograph, and certainly report it to me if there's something interesting. And if anybody would like to actually put down their localities that they've spotted the echidna in the last couple of years, I've left a number of forms out on the back table. They're actually koala sightings forms, but if you cross that out and put echidna, I will give these forms to a third-year student, and we can map them out and see if there's any patterns. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that's given you some insights into mammals of the region. We are immensely fortunate, I think, to have the animal life that we've got, and it would be marvellous to see them more common. Thank you.
Alan, do you want to take some questions?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Come.
Yes.
It was raised many years ago when some people wanted to introduce various things up there, and I raised that very issue with them. I said, if you introduce it, you are responsible.
Yes.
If they introduce themselves, they're responsible.
Yes, that's true. Although I suppose there is a problem in overpopulation on the. I mean, if we do get up to 200 wallaroos in there, then it becomes. Yeah, certainly going on the road is not their problem. That was Lou something I agree. I guess it's we who've got the problem of driving carefully and keeping an eye out. In fact, I have seen a big dead male up on the edge of the freeway, right beside the gardens. So it is potentially a risk. Yeah. Yes.
Why don't you pick up roadkills? We do it all the time. Can't bear to see them get squashed and splattered and ground into.
Well, it's one thing to pull it off this on the side of the road. It's a different thing to cut the head off and put it in your boot. See, the laws are set up so that people who are shooting for trophies or whatever don't have an escape route. But it does mean that it's harder to record localities. Yeah. Yes.
The bush rat and the swamp rat, would they be likely to go into house roofs? Because we get rats in our roof, and I don't know.
No, I think you're pretty well going to have Rattus rattus. It's called the tree rat or the ship's rat because it does like to make nests in trees and used to get up in the rigging. Certainly the swamp rat won't go into your houses. I'm sure of that. Bush rat too, it likes its wet gullies. I think it'd be very unusual to find a native rat inside. Antechinus will come inside now. They'll come in and they'll pick off what little insects you've got around the place. Yeah.
What do those rats eat, those bush rats and water rats?
Well, the water rat eats anything aquatic, mussels. You'll see a little, they call it dining tables. They leave a little pile of shellfish or yabby bits and whatever. Bush rat eats pretty well omnivorous and in fact has a diet much like Rattus rattus. And when you see disturbance, you'll actually find that you'll have increasing numbers of Rattus rattus and decreasing numbers of Rattus fuscipes, bush rat. So they do take over, unfortunately. Yeah. Tom?
Can you comment on the feral mammal population, things like cats, foxes and dogs? How big is that in the region, and are they increasing or decreasing, or is there any ideas how that's going?
We certainly have a lot of trouble with dogs out at Kent Lynn, and there was a spate there when we were finding a couple of dead swamp wallabies every week or two. And as you walk through the bush, you will see dogs moving through the bush. Yeah, it is a big problem because dogs will run and kill even when they're well fed at home, which means that during the drought periods when things are tough for the prey animals in the bush, it doesn't affect the dogs who are fit and healthy. So yeah, we always try and persuade people to keep their dogs locked up because they will roam if they're not. Cats, it's interesting. You don't see all that many cats around the place. Mainly we found dumped animals down the Wedderburn Gorge. It's pretty hard to assess, although when we were doing the spotlighting at Mount Edmund with the spotlights, we were seeing foxes and cats in quite big numbers. But generally out in the bush, I don't know. Yes.
What sort of habitat does the dunnet like?
Let's see what Mr. Robinson says about the dunnet. Okay, information on this species is scanty, but there are several records. The species favours dry sclerophyll forest, where there is ground cover such as logs, stumps or boulders. As the species is generally trap shy, there are insufficient records to attempt any assessment of its status. So there you are, dry sclerophyll with logs, stumps or boulders. Plenty of that habitat about. Yes.
I fancy I've seen eastern grey kangaroos along the Georges River
Yeah.
and swamp wallabies also.
Yes.
Are there, am I mistaken, are they all swamp wallabies?
Well, pretty much everything you see that's about that high in the dark is going to be a swamp wallaby. Thank you for mentioning greys, because they do occur in the Macarthur region. I've seen them at the end of Aberfoyle Road at Wedderburn. Only once. They appeared in the survey that was done for the Holsworthy Airport. Again, we don't know how big that population is, but it's certainly there.
But I see them all the time down near the Woolwash.
You sure you're not seeing the wallaroo?
These are much lighter.
Are they?
And they sit up straight.
Okay, well, that sounds like that. Oh, that's good if they're at the Woolwash. Yeah. Thank you for that, Nick.
Rob, have you got any idea why the wallaroos are doing so well?
No, I don't. The wallaroos are able to live on very poor food. So that made, in most places where the wallaroo takes over from another macropod species, it's because the browsers declined in quality. But they're not really taking over from anybody else. They're just doing well. I don't know why it is. Nor do we know why the swamp wallaby is doing so well.
I don't think it's because the greys generally get around in small mobs and they're a lot more visible, when the wallaroos tend to be a little bit more solitary. They are out our way. You'll see a couple of wallaroos or an old buck, but you see a group of grey kangaroos, and they're out in the open, usually grazing. I don't know whether that's significant, but that's how we see them out there.
Yeah. Well, the wallaroos certainly, they're called the rock kangaroo or the hill kangaroo, so they do love to stay around that the cave area. But why they're spreading so well around Campbelltown, I don't know. Yes, Rob.
We understand foxes and dogs and that are predators, but what about the deer? Are they a threat to the other animals as competition?
I imagine they would be eventually, but I guess erosion's probably and perhaps the grazing pressure on some plants may be more important. Look, I don't know. That's deer certainly have been seen in the Macarthur region.
Well, there was one on the Apple Bulleye roadkill.
Was there? Yeah, look, I don't know. Yes.
Do you see these animals mainly at dusk and night time?
Yeah, most of the marsupials are dusk and morning animals. But some, the carnivorous ones, probably you only see them at night, pretty much. Yeah, it's easiest to see with a spotlight, certainly.
Rob, you haven't talked about platypus.
Yes.
Do you have any proof that we've got them in the Macarthur region at all?
There have been two very good reports in the Georges River fairly recently, where one was actually found damaged in a rock hole in the Georges, and the person who gave me the report said he actually pulled it out of this rock hole. For those people who go down on the Georges, you'll know they've got these sort of little drill holes, maybe that wide. It's quite deep, and this thing was damaged in it. So I have no reason to disbelieve him. And another couple of lads saw a platypus go into a hole up in the upper O'Hare's Creek in the Georges. And then I had a scout leader who swore blind that he had seen platypus on several occasions in the Douglas Park region of the river. So I have no reason to suspect that they're not in both rivers to some extent. Why they're not more common in the Nepean, we don't know. We've had a lad who's been mapping the area from Douglas Park downstream, and he's given high ratings for good quality habitat for the platypus from Douglas Park down. So why they're not there, I don't know. They should be.
Those are the questions.
Yeah.
say they should be? Why would you say, on what grounds are you saying that they should be found there?
Okay, because we know they're upstream, and we get these sightings of. I'm wearing Brian Matthew's jaw on my foot. Okay, we know that they're seen upstream, and so young dispersing animals should be coming downstream, and we presume these sightings that we get from time to time are dispersing young animals. And so you would expect them to set up shop in areas where the banks are high, but they need about 1 metre of solid bank above the water level, and they need a vegetation covering at water level so they can actually get into the bank areas. And they've got plenty of that sort of habitat. So I mean, if you go to what's the place? Not Barrel. What's the other? Berrimah. Yeah, if you go canoeing at Berrimah, you'll very often see 2 or 3 animals just downstream from the jail. So if they're there, they should also be in the Nepean. But we hope they will return.
Could I just demonstrate my absolute ignorance? What is a wallaroo?
Okay, a wallaroo is a rock kangaroo. So it classifies as a kangaroo because it's got the feet size that's over the 25 centimetres. It's just the common name for a big hairy kangaroo, basically, that lives in these, likes to live in these.
So it's not the
It's not a combination of a kangaroo and a wallaroo. It's just a name. Yes.
So you can differentiate between different types of wallabies?
Footprints are pretty hard. Like if you're trying to tell the difference between a paddymell and, say, a rock wallaby, I would certainly be looking for the toe prints. You could probably tell a rock wallaby from a swamp wallaby and a paddymell because of the toes. You'd probably be hard pushed to tell the difference between a grey kangaroo and a wallaroo, I would think. Swamp wallabies, sort of medium length. I guess you could make that distinction, whether you've got swamp wallabies or wallaroos just in the size.
But not swamp wallaby and, say, redneck wallaby?
No, it'd be pretty good to do that. I mean, the experts could, but I couldn't even give you much of a rule of thumb. The paddymellons tend to have fairly shorter toes than the others.
Okay, so whereabouts was it? Oh, yes. Wow. Yeah, I mean, this sort of information would be really great to be able to map all around the city. And yet it's hard to... I mean, I'd be very happy for people to email me at r.close@uws.edu.au, and we'll put them on the... we'll keep all these data together. Would be great to know. Yeah, look, I forgot to talk about wombats. I meant to do so, because it is a common one, or a relatively common one in the region. Yes?
The wombat up in Stokes Creek.
Stokes Creek?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, David. David was one of the people that saw the little wallaby that's had me intrigued, and I'd love to find out what that is.